All right, let's talk about a story where geography is basically destiny, and where one nation decided to spend billions trying to change that destiny. This is a tale of two massive projects, one that's very real, and one that's, well, a spectacular dream, both designed to fix one single gigantic problem for the entire world economy.
It sounds like something out of a legend, right? But for the strategists and engineers in the UAE, this wasn't some fantasy. It was a real-world puzzle that led to two completely different answers. One made of practical solid steel, and the other born from almost impossible ambition. So let's dive into how they tackled it.
To get why anyone would even think about moving a mountain, you've got to understand the problem itself. And believe me, it's a big one. It has a name, the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, take a look at this map. See that tiny gap? That single, narrow waterway, just 33 kilometers wide at its tightest point, is without a doubt the most critical energy choke point on the planet. Pretty much all the oil from giants like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, Kuwait, you name it, it all has to squeeze through this one spot to get to the rest of us.
So what are we talking about in terms of volume? Well, that little stretch of water sees 20 million barrels of oil pass through it.
Let that sink in. 20 million barrels every single day. That's almost a fifth of the entire planet's daily oil supply. So you can imagine whenever there's tension in this region, the entire global economy pretty much holds its breath.
For decades, this has been the billion-dollar question. How do you build an escape hatch? This exact question led the UAE down two very, very different paths. One real and one, well, a dream.
First up, let's talk about the project that actually happened. The pragmatic, no-nonsense, steel and concrete solution to this huge geopolitical headache. It's called the Abu Dhabi Crude Oil Pipeline, or ADCOP for short, and its mission is brilliantly simple. Create an artery for oil that runs over land, completely avoiding the vulnerable strait altogether.
So let's look at the specs. We're talking about a 360-kilometer pipeline. It cost about $3.3 billion to build and went online in 2012. It can move up to 1.8 million barrels of oil a day. Now that's a serious amount, a great insurance policy, but it's still just a fraction of that 20 million that goes through Hormuz.
And this is where you can really see the genius of the strategy. The pipeline is basically a land bridge. It connects the oil fields at Habshan directly to the port of Fujairah, which sits safely outside the choke point on the Gulf of Oman. It's smart, it's effective, and most importantly, it's real.
But, while the pipeline was the practical play, it wasn't the only idea on the table. If we rewind to 2008, right at the peak of Dubai's mega-project boom, a much, much crazier idea was floated. I mean, it was almost unbelievable.
The thinking wasn't just to move the oil, but to move the actual ships, the whole shebang. A 180-kilometer-long canal that would be like a new Suez or Panama, just slicing right through the peninsula. This was ambition on a whole other level, a project that would literally redraw the map.
And the price tag? Well, it was just as wild. An estimated $200 billion. Just think about that. The pipeline we just talked about was about $3 billion. This canal dream was on a completely different financial planet.
So, why that mind-boggling price tag? Well, because building this thing meant going to war with some of the most brutal and unforgiving terrain you can imagine. The engineering challenges were, to put it mildly, just staggering.
Okay, get this. Before you could even start digging the canal, you'd have to build an entire industrial city in the absolute middle of nowhere. We're talking about blasting 180 kilometers of roads out of sheer cliffs, just so you could get your equipment there. Oh, and you need a dedicated power plant and a giant desalination facility, just for the construction, because there's absolutely no water out there.
Now for the main event, the digging. This project would have meant removing 400 million cubic meters of mountain rock. To give you some perspective, that is 40 times, not 40 times, the entire excavation of the Panama Canal. Wow!
And here's the craziest part. There's a 3,000-meter-high mountain range, the Hajar Mountains, smack in the middle of the path. You can't go around it. So what do? You have to go over it. And that would require over 400 enormous Panama-sized locks to literally lift the world's biggest supertankers up and over the mountains. The engineering is just mind-bending to even think about.
So when you put the real, built project right next to the wild, spectacular dream, the verdict becomes pretty darn clear.
All right, let's break it down side by side. Cost? $3.3 billion versus over $200 billion. Feasibility? One is built and working right now, the other never left the drawing board. But here's the real kicker: security. A pipeline is a pretty small, defensible target. But a 180-kilometer-long canal? That's not a bypass. That's a 180-kilometer-long vulnerability.
This quote from an analyst really just hits the nail on the head. The very problem the canal was supposed to solve, being too vulnerable, it actually would have made it worse on a much, much bigger scale.
And that's why, when you look around the whole region, pipelines are the accepted go-to strategy. Saudi Arabia has a massive one, there are routes through Iraq, they're the practical choice. Now, they can't replace Hormuz completely, but they serve as a critical, real-world insurance policy if things go sideways.
So at the end of the day, the UAE chose the practical pipeline over the fantastical canal. It was the achievable, secure, and frankly, the logical choice. But that amazing, wild ambition of the canal, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? As our world faces all these new threats to supply chains and trade routes, what other impossible projects are being sketched out right now? And what mountain are we going to have to figure out how to move next?